Welcome to Everything is Final Fantasy. I'm Ira Kriesman.
And I'm Drew Kriesman.
And on this episode, Magic the Gathering is Final Fantasy. Drew,
yeah,
we're doing a crossover.
Finally.
I'm so excited, man. I am so excited. So, in June of this year, Magic the Gathering will release its Universes Beyond Final Fantasy. I know there are several folks who don't like Universes Beyond, and that's fine. You don't have to. But I love it, and I'm excited. And we're going to talk about all the cards that were revealed for the... they did a first look for Final Fantasy in general, the set in general, but they also do Commander decks. Commander is a very specific format that sometimes gets its own cards.
Yeah, I didn't really understand that because it's been so long since I've played, and I saw those. I was like, I am so out of the loop, but luckily I've got a brother who's going to explain all of this to me.
So real briefly, Drew, what is your experience with Magic the Gathering?
Yeah, I guess I should go first because it's going to be a lot briefer than yours. Because you introduced me to Magic the Gathering. Like many things of my childhood, but most especially this one. My memory is just that you came home from school one day and this was a thing you did now. I assume somebody at school had introduced it to you, but you introduced it to me. Absolutely. And for a while there, I don't really ever remember collecting a ton, but I did have my own cards. I had my own decks. I started to build for a little while, and like a lot of things when I was younger, I just didn't stick with it. You know, some things you do, some things you don't. And it wasn't one of the things that I kept up with, where you kept playing and you always had your... So we would often get you Magic cards as birthday and Christmas presents going back to middle school, high school at the very least. And I remember, you know, you having the like special life gems and things like that, and protecting some of the cards. And I remember it being one of the first hobbies that you really got into in a big way. And so I always kind of dug it. I was always around it. I would play when we would get together with your other friends who played. But I think after that first year or two, I stopped kind of getting them for myself or maintaining anything. And then over the years, you know, every once in a while something will pop up. Was Magic the Gathering Arena there for a little while, like the PC version of it. And I picked that up and played for a little while and had some fun with it, but then also found, you know, I was limited in what I could do. And so, yeah, I've always enjoyed it, but I've never made it a primary hobby of mine.
Whereas I most certainly have.
Right.
Even though I don't play very much anymore, I still keep up with what's going on. I collect cards. I build decks, even though I might not ever actually play them. I really love this game. And I started playing in 1995 when I was 14 years old. So that was high school time.
Okay.
And I've been buying cards ever since. It's a lot of fun, and I really enjoy it, and I'm really excited.
So, Ira, before we get too deep into this Final Fantasy thing, do as quick as you can. I would like a little bit of an explanation of what this series is, some of the other things that they've done, why you've generally been hyped about it, and kind of how Magic the Gathering is operating these days. Because for someone like me who hasn't really been paying attention the last, 20 years... a lot has changed, and even the idea of them having these big crossovers is weird and fun and cool and interesting. So give us a quick little overview of what brought us to this moment, and then we'll jump into the Final Fantasy stuff.
So much like Final Fantasy, Magic is often reimagining itself, reinventing itself, redefining itself. So it used to be that it was more strictly swords and sorcery, vaguely medieval, and it would visit a variety of cultures and or folklores and or myths and legends and do their take on it. Or they would do a trope, like one of the early tropes that they hit real hard and was real successful was Gothic horror. And that world is called Innistrad. And it went over really well. Some don't go over as well more recently. And I disagree with the popular opinion here. But they did a murder mystery set. That one wasn't quite my jam. I think the reason a lot of people didn't like that one as much was because it was set on Ravnica, which has a very clear Magic the Gathering identity, and they didn't lean into it at all.
Okay.
More recently, they did an Old West styled aesthetic
Sure.
called Thunder Junction. And there are people, they did a haunted house called Duskmorn, and they did most recently a Death Race set called Ether Drift. Now, some of the complaints I see, and you know how I don't really like to
Sure.
pay attention to internet complaints, but one of the things I've seen is it's your favorite characters in cowboy hats, your favorite characters in a haunted house, your favorite characters in a race car or whatever.
Sure.
And I can appreciate that if they feel like the depth of the world building is only Jace Beleren in a cowboy hat, how that would be frustrating. But I don't think that's really what's the world building is. I think the world building remains as deep as ever. So
Sure.
I don't jibe with that critique. Some others just say it doesn't feel like Magic, and it
That's always it doesn't feel like Final Fantasy. It doesn't feel like Star Wars.
exactly. And so I don't have a lot of patience for that critique either.
I will say it's kind of funny, the critique about like it's just them in a cowboy hat or it's just them racing or whatever. It's just there are a lot of video games over the years. I'm looking at you, Mario, where it's like that have also proven that that can be just fine. Like again, I don't know the lore, so I'll take your word for it that it does run deeper than that. But just for the sake of argument, it also doesn't necessarily always need to, right? Mario Kart is fun. And it's just, hey, look, your favorite characters are all now driving carts. Why? Because they are. Because it's fun. Stop trying to ruin my day. You know, whatever that Ainsley Hayes line is. Like, you're taking the fun out of my day. So, yeah, I do think that sometimes just mixing things up, or people will say of World of Final Fantasy, it's just Final Fantasy, but cutesy style and Pokemon. And I'm like, that sounds great. Why did you put the word just in there?
So a couple years ago, they announced they were going to do Universes Beyond, which would be other IPs using Magic the Gathering mechanics.
Right.
So they started with Stranger Things, which to me was an odd choice because it doesn't feel very Magic the Gathering
Right.
adjacent.
You might even call it a strange choice.
And then they did, actually, you know what, I take that back. They did Walking Dead first.
Also a strange choice. I can't make a pun there. Dead choice. I don't know. But
But the part of my expectation with the finite but widely diverse multiverse that is Magic the Gathering is that any kind of world could exist. So why can't we visit any kind of world? Why couldn't we visit a world that's based on more modern aesthetics, like the Duskmorn haunted house
sure.
is kind of based on 80s horror movies?
Similarly, you know, Kingdom Hearts has run into this, if you want to call it problem, a little bit. But once they introduced the premise of we are multiverse hopping, it exactly raises that question, right? Of like, actually, this can work in lots of different ways. Let's stretch and test what that can be because it's fun and creative. And then some people get lost because they feel like it isn't what it used to be, isn't what it started as, that it's gone too far, right? And it's like, well, and that's, I think, what some people just don't like about multiverses is they can get pretty
Sure.
unwieldy, and I do understand that to some extent, but I think they're fun, so whatever.
And I'm not trying to tell people who don't like it that they should like it. I'm just
Right.
trying to say, you don't have to grumble and roll your eyes at me every time I say I do like
Right.
it. So they've done, they did a big Warhammer 40K. They did Lord of the Rings. They did, what else?
Those
they
seem
do?
more
Fallout.
natural fits. Fallout too, yeah.
Sure. And they're gonna do Final Fantasy this year, also Spider-Man, and they just announced Avatar: The Last
Saw
Airbender.
that.
So, the Marvel stuff I like. I'm not as jazzed for Magic the Gathering Marvel comics,
Yeah.
but Final Fantasy and Avatar I am. And when I am not that excited about a Magic set, I just don't buy much.
Yeah.
I do think though that they're putting out too many products a year. That's a complaint I definitely agree with. It is hard to keep up with how much is coming out. So, all that said, what I thought we would do is just go through the list of cards. I think there's 19 cards that have been
Oh, boy.
previewed so
All right, we're
far.
gonna have to pace ourselves.
I'll read them out. I'll explain why I think they either are a hit or not when it comes to the crossover thereof. But I'm not much of one for analyzing power level.
Sure.
So I'm not going to do
That's probably
that.
too deep of a conversation for this show. We're just going to... Half the people listening only know one or the other.
We're going to do plot, themes, and characters, right?
Right.
So we're going to go in order: white, blue, black, red, green, and then multicolor. And I want to point out a few details before we talk about the first card. So are you looking at Scryfall?
Yeah, I do have the visual up now, so I did want to get that.
So you'll notice on the type line where it says enchantment on this first card to the right, the set symbol is the FF from Final Fantasy and a crystal, which is neat.
Yeah.
Now, a thing they haven't done before that I really appreciate for this release, look at the bottom left corner.
Yeah.
It says U, and then it's got the card number, and then just to the right of that, FFXV for Final Fantasy 15. So they have listed for each card, each concept, either what version they're pulling from or where it first came from.
Yeah.
And I think that's pretty cool.
That is pretty cool.
So the first card is a double-faced card, side quest, catch a fish. And I don't know if we've ever had colons in Magic the Gathering titles before.
I didn't even know there were double-faced cards. So, here we go.
There you go. It costs 2 generic and 1 white for an enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, look at the top card of your library. If it's an artifact or creature card, you may reveal it and put it into your hand. If you put a card into your hand this way, create a food token and transform this enchantment. So, at the beginning of your turn, you essentially fish the top of your library. If it's one of the things you're looking for, artifact or creature, you put it into your hand and you get a food token. I don't remember right off the top of my head what a food token does, but I think you can...
Yeah, I don't know what most of that means, but it sounds good. I like the picture of Noctis catching a fish.
And the big arches in the background?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. So you get a food token, and like it's 3 taps, sacrifice, gain 2 life, or something like that. And then to transform it, so click on those little arrows, and it will flip it over to the backside.
Oh.
And you get a card called Cooking Campsite, which is a land that taps for white, or 3 and tap, sacrifice an artifact, for example, that food token you just made. Put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control, activate only as a sorcery. So you could sacrifice any artifact, but the story this card is telling is Noctis goes fishing, Ignis cooks the fish.
That's cute. I do really enjoy that, and I really like the quotes on the front.
I was going to do the flavor text. You want to read the flavor text?
I want to read that because the quotes have always been my favorite parts of the Magic cards. There's the art and the quotes, and the front says, "I am Noctis, Prince of Lucis and King of Fishing." Excellent. And the back says, it's an Ignis quote. "Seeing how you enjoy fishing, you should learn how to prepare your catch." At about a B- Ignis.
Yeah, not bad at all.
Yeah.
Not bad at all. Next, we have Stiltskin, Moogle Merchant. So one of the things they said when they were first started doing Universes Beyond is, we will use the creature types of the world we're in, but we'll use regular, our more normal creature types if they fit.
Sure.
So they used Moogle. They didn't use like cat creature or something.
Right.
So it's he costs 1 white for a 1/2. He's a legendary creature Moogle. He's got lifelink and 2 tap. Target opponent gains control of another target permanent you control. If they do, draw a card. So essentially, you are selling a permanent you control to an opponent to draw a card.
Fun.
Yeah, and there are... I immediately think of Zedru the Great-Hearted, which is a Magic card.
Sure.
Where at the beginning of your turn, you get to draw cards and gain life for each permanent your opponent controls but you own.
Yeah.
Right, so you're giving stuff away, and there are things you can give away that will mess with your opponent.
Will hurt them. Yeah, sure.
Do you want to read the flavor text?
Sure. Yeah. I can't remember if I ever developed a concept of a voice for Stiltskin, so I'll just... I do. I think it was, unless I'm getting him mixed up. I always read Stiltskin like he was from Brooklyn. I don't 100% know. There were certain things in the text of Final Fantasy IX, so I always felt like this is good. Before we even get there, this is giving us a chance to talk about some of the games. It's going to take us, years before we get to talk about. Although 9 is next on the list. Still, he says, "How about a 3-piece combo, a high potion, an ether, and a phoenix pinion for 444 gil?"
Perfect.
Thank you.
A+.
Excellent.
Next we have Summon, Shiva. This is 3 generic and 2 blue for a 4/5 enchantment creature, Saga Elemental.
Wow, that all sounds neat.
So we've never had Saga creatures before. This is the first. We've had enchantment creatures like artifact creatures, But Sagas came out in Dominaria because Dominaria was the first world Magic ever set stories on, and it's got all this history and all these books written about it. And even the first time we went there, it was sort of an archaeology set. The tagline is something like, if you try to dig a well on Dominaria, you're going to uncover a spaceship. So they told all these stories in sagas. So what happens with a saga is when it comes into play, you put a lore counter on it and you do chapter 1, then chapter 2, then chapter 3, and after chapter 3, you sacrifice it. So essentially, the summons, assuming they all follow this same pattern, are going to stick around for a few turns, do their thing, and then go away.
That's extremely clever. At some point during that, I was like, I'm not sure I'm understanding all this. But then when you put it there at the end, when you wrapped it up in a bow for me, I was like, that's very cool. I get what happens. They're using the language and tools and mechanics of Magic the Gathering to mimic how this works in Final Fantasy. And that's really cool.
And you'll notice in the bottom left, Shiva, this Shiva is specifically from Final Fantasy X.
I could tell that from the art. Because I'm an OG. Sorry.
There you go.
That's the nerdiest way anyone has ever said I'm an OG.
So chapters 1 and 2 are Heavenly Strike. Tap target creature an opponent controls. Put a stun counter on it. And chapter 3 is Diamond Dust.
Diamond Dust, as it would have to be.
Draw a card for each tapped creature your opponents control.
Cool.
So essentially, she'll stick around for a couple of turns. You can block with her twice or block with her once and attack once. Mm-hmm. So she won't get a lot of battlefield time, which makes sense. And I like that they're sagas because it's kind of... Summons aren't really stories, but like you said, they don't stick around long, and so it matches that. And they, in a way, because they transcend the games, they appear in multiple games, I like the idea that, to some degrees, they are stories.
Right.
Next, we have Cecil, Dark Knight.
I know that guy.
For 1 black mana, I know I said we weren't going to talk about power level, but 1 black mana, you get a 2/3 death touch.
Wow.
That's pretty good. He's a legendary creature, human knight, and darkness. Whenever Cecil deals damage, you lose that much life. So that's the drawback of getting a 2/3 death touch for 1 mana.
That's rad.
Then if your life total is less than or equal to half your starting life total, untap Cecil and transform it.
Into what?
Cecil, Redeemed Paladin. He's a 4/4 with lifelink and protect. Whenever Cecil attacks, other attacking creatures gain indestructible until end of turn.
Awesome. And both of those powers reflect the Final Fantasy Dark Knight and Paladin powers. That's really, really cool. Very cool.
So one of the things they started doing with Universes Beyond is naming abilities. Normally a keyword has mechanics behind it. So flying has a specific set of mechanics. Death touch has a specific set of mechanics. Then they started doing these ability words that were in italics, so they didn't have a specific mechanic, but they sort of tied together a single mechanic. So later we're going to see one called Landfall. Landfall is a regular magic mechanic, and it just means whenever a land comes into play, do a thing, get a thing, whatever it is. But these ones like Darkness, Diamond Dust, they're basically just for flavor.
I also really love the art on the Paladin version of Cecil here. It's like an anime looking version. It's not exactly the Amano version. It's not exactly the Dissidia version. It's kind of its own Elseworlds thing, where the front of it looks very much just like the Dissidia version of the Dark Knight Cecil that I'm used to seeing. I really like the art on the back of that.
And one of the things Magic has started doing is what they call booster funds. So you'll get your regular Magic the Gathering frames, but then sometimes you'll have an extended art, or you'll have, like you said, this one's got the regular art, but also sort of an anime art. Next we have Tonberry. For 1 black mana, you get a 2/1 creature, Salamander Horror. Gotta say, that was not my expectation for Tonberry.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what my expectation was, but that wasn't it. I'm not mad about it.
No. I will also say, too, right off the bat, that the art for this one looks the most like something you might already see in Magic. Like, this could have easily just been a Magic the Gathering creature. happens to be a Tonberry. When you look at this, you're like, you fit right in. Some of these other things are clearly special and doing their thing and fitting into the thing, but the Tonberry is like, yeah, you could have been like an Edition 1 Magic the Gathering character.
This creature enters tapped with a stun counter on it, so it's slow. It only costs 1, but you've got to wait a turn before you can even untap it.
Well, he's got to walk all the way across the screen before he can poke you with his sticky.
Precisely. Chef's Knife. During your turn, this creature has First Strike and Death Touch.
Yep, that'll do it.
and so it really is. I mean, so far I think all the flavor is a home run. It basically does a good to very good job of encapsulating what that creature or thing is in Magic mechanics. Next, we have Dragon of Mount Gulg. Now, one of the things they've started to do with Universes Beyond is essentially a skin, like you might think about in a video game. That is, this is already a card that they've printed before, and it's not a reprint in exactly the same way, but essentially counts as that game piece. So you can have, in most Magic the Gathering decks, you can have 4 of, right? You can have 4 versions of Ancient Copper Dragon, which this is a skin of.
I like that.
So it counts as one of, you could have like 2 Ancient Copper Dragons and 2 Dragon of Mount Gulg, but no more because they count as the same thing. So it's 4 generic and 2 red for a 6/5 creature Elder Dragon flying. Whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, roll a d20. You create a number of treasure tokens equal to the result. Now you might notice d20, that sounds awfully D&D.
Yeah.
When they did the Dungeons & Dragons set a few years ago, they printed cards for all the major dragon types, including copper dragons, and they used the mechanic of rolling a d20 to get X, Y, or Z. So one of the reasons I love this so very, very much is this is a Magic card of a D&D dragon reskinned into a Final Fantasy dragon.
Fantasy, yeah.
Using Yoshitaka Amano art.
Right.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Is that not just holy moly?
Yeah, that is a nice combination of tasty things.
Next, we have Jumbo Cactuar, and this one has made waves on the internet.
Oh.
For 5 generic and 2 green, you get a 1/7 creature plant. Its ability is called 10,000 Needles. Whenever this creature attacks, it gets plus 9,999 plus 0 until end of turn. So it will be a creature with 10,000 power and 7 toughness. Drew, there are spells, most notably Fling, that allow you to, as an additional cost, sacrifice a creature to cast this spell. Deal damage to target opponent equal to the sacrificed creature's power. You're just going to throw a Jumbo Cactuar at somebody.
Yeah.
I love it.
That's awesome.
This is amazing.
And the flavor text for this one is not a quote, but it simply reads, "Some cactuars live long lives and grow huge. This Jumbo Cactuar is one of them."
And it's got the mustaches and everything.
Mustache. Yeah.
There is some whimsy to Final Fantasy. And I think Magic's got whimsy too. But I don't know. Sometimes it feels like they try to lean too hard into badass and forget the whimsy. But they're not shying away from it in this set. Next we have Saz's Chocobo. For 1 green, you get a 0/1 bird. Landfall. Whenever a land you control enters, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature.
Wow, that's pretty good.
It's not bad at all.
That can get pretty tough after a while.
Yeah.
I love that there's attention being given to something like Zaz's Chocobo.
Right.
You know, some of these other things are not a surprise at all. You know, Shiva, a lot of these things are really icons of Final Fantasy so far, main characters and summons and creatures and things like that. The Tonberry being iconic, but Zaz's Chocobo isn't necessarily incredibly well known, and obviously 13 is one of the lesser known games in the franchise, so it's really cool to see that. I love it.
And knowing that little Chocobo goes on to be a more major character in the trilogy and gets, I think, pretty powerful, right?
Right. I thought it was interesting that they chose not to call it Chocolina, but I guess it wasn't at this point yet, if you want to get technical, you know, so.
Well, and then read the flavor text, sir, because I'm pretty sure this is a quote right out of like the glossaries in the game.
Yeah, I was ahead of myself, or I suppose right on time. It reads, "This chick has no name. as voicing the true identity of the animal might trigger ripples of destiny across Cocoon and cause a hurricane in Eden. Either that or Zaz just hasn't thought of it. It just hasn't thought of a name yet.
Yeah.
That's funny. That's great. I love it.
I love it. Next, we have Emmett Selch, Unsundered.
Okay.
Now, I haven't played much Final Fantasy XIV, as you know.
Yeah, I do know that. I have played considerably more Final Fantasy XIV than you. I have played 2 expansions more and hundreds of hours more. And the answer to your question is no. I don't know this character, except that I am on the internet, probably more than I should be. And I have seen this character's name brought up when I ask people questions like who's your favorite villain, or who gave a great speech, or what's a great line of dialogue, or who. There's a lot of people that just love this character. I'm very interested to see when I do get there, and I will eventually. I have to really be able to set aside like a couple of months worth of gameplay time to make it worth the while of, paying for the thing. But yeah, I've heard of the character. I've seen them before. I don't know much about that. I'm trying to keep myself not spoiled.
So the card reads, for 1 generic, 1 blue, and 1 black, you get a 2/4 legendary creature, Elder Wizard. Now, normally Magic does the race class method of creature types. Is Elder a race? Not typically. So I'm not sure what that's about.
Right. Yeah. I'm actually not either, because it's not one of the races of Eorzea that I am familiar with. So,
right. Fair enough.
Yeah.
He's got Vigilance, and whenever this enters or attacks, draw a card, then discard a card, which is pretty good, being able to filter through your deck. Drawing a card is, and especially if you've got a dedicated graveyard theme, that's a good engine. At the beginning of your upkeep, if there are 14 or more cards in your graveyard, you may transform Emmett Selch. And on the other side, he is a legendary creature avatar, 6/6, Hades, Sorcerer of Eld. He's got Vigilance and Echo of the Lost. Echo, right? Huh?
I kind of know what that is. This feels a little spoilery, but I'm okay.
During your turn, you may play cards from your graveyard. So if you're filtering into your graveyard, that's pretty cool. If a card or token would be put into your graveyard from anywhere, exile it instead. Next we have Sephiroth. Planet's Heir. Now, I want to point out that we're going to have a Sephiroth and a Cloud from the starter decks, and some of these characters are going to get more than one version, which we'll see here in a bit. But
Sure.
My guess is this is not the only version of Sephiroth we'll get. He is a 4/4 legendary creature, human avatar soldier. For 4 generic, a blue and a black. He has Vigilance, and whenever this enters, creatures your opponents control get -2/-2 until end of turn.
Because he spooky dookied them.
You just kill all those dudes. And whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, put a +1/+1 counter on this. So if you play Sephiroth and you kill 5 of, he's got 5 1/1s and you kill them all with Sephiroth just entering the battlefield, suddenly Sephiroth also gets a +1/+1 counter on it.
Oh, right. Yeah. Oh,
Or
wow.
I think actually he would get 5, right? So suddenly he's a 9/9 Vigilance.
Yeah. Wow. Neat. I want
Pretty
that
cool.
one.
It's kind of expensive, but there
Sure.
are ways to cheat cards in. My guess is that could be pretty impressive. Next we have Yuffie Kisaragi. For a generic, a blue and a black, you get a 1/3, and she is a reskin of a magic character, Yuriko the Tiger's Shadow.
Cool.
Not quite as a cool reskin of a Dungeons and Dragons thing,
Sure.
reskinned as a Final Fantasy thing, but it's still an appropriate card. Legendary creature, human ninja, commander ninjutsu, blue and black, which means you can ninjutsu her in from the command zone, which I know you don't know what that means,
No.
but that's okay.
It sounds neat. I just imagined the command center from Power Rangers. She can ninjutsu her in from the command center, is what I heard. And I just went, rad. This game's awesome. I got to get back into Magic, dude.
And she's all about ninjas. So whenever a ninja you control deals combat damage to a player, reveal the top card of your library and put that card into your hand. Each opponent loses life equal to that card's mana value. So if you got a bunch of ninjas, she's a really good card to have. The other thing I like here is that they just used Tetsuya Nomura art, and it just sort of looks... My first thought was, this looks like kind of bad clip art, But one, it's Nomura's art, and two, the Final Fantasy card game basically just takes screenshots or like official art, and just puts it right on the card.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what this looks like. So I kind of love it.
As a reference point, yeah, I think it's all right. It's not as fun as some of these others, but I do think it doesn't look terrible, I don't think.
Next we have Garland, Knight of Cornelia. For 1 black and 1 red, you get a 3/2 legendary creature human knight. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, surveil 1, which means look at the top card of your library and you may put it into your graveyard. So, Garland is looking into the future with surveil. Then for 3 generic 2 black and 2 red, return this card from your graveyard to the battlefield transformed. Activate only as a sorcery. So if he dies, you can bring him back.
Because yeah.
Now, Drew, would you please read the flavor text?
I will. I, Garland, will knock you all down.
How about that? Can you believe that they did that? That's so perfect.
On the one hand, I was like, I can't believe they did that. On the other hand, I was like, what else would they even... Like, anything else would have been a massive disappointment.
Right. It's so perfect.
So good on them.
On the backside, he is a legendary creature demon, 5/5. He's got flying and he is Chaos, the Endless.
Spoilers.
For a 2,000-year time loop.
Yeah, right.
When he dies, put him on the bottom of its owner's library. So perfect. Exactly correct. I love it.
Even as you die again and again, I shall return.
Now, speaking of Chaos, I do want to point out that they have said they're doing games 1 through 16. So my guess is that means no spin-offs and no sequels.
No Stranger of Paradise. No Jack.
No Jack. But if this set does well, and it has the potential to, maybe we'll get another Final Fantasy set one day.
Yeah. It should be only spin-offs. It's just Crystal Chronicles and World of Crisis Core.
So next we've got Cloud, Planet's Champion. And this is the mirror to the Sephiroth card we just read from the starter decks.
All right.
So this is a version of Cloud. We're going to see another one here in a minute. But this one is 3 generic, a red and a white for a 4/4 legendary creature, human, soldier, mercenary. Good so far.
Yeah.
During your turn, as long as Cloud is equipped, it has double strike and indestructible. Equip abilities you activate that target Cloud cost 2 less to activate. So they've made Cloud an equipment-based character, which I think makes a certain amount of sense in that equipping Final Fantasy characters is a thing.
Yeah, well, and particularly in 7, materia had a big determining factor in what you could and couldn't do, right? So
right. Now we're going to move on to the Commander cards. Commander is just a format in the same way that Standard or Modern or Draft are formats. It's the same rule set, a few extra rules for Commander. And they print specifically Commander decks that are not part of the main set, so they get their own collector numbers. And Drew, they get their own set symbol. Looking at Ishtala, what is her set symbol?
It's a little chocobo.
It is a little chocobo. That is absolutely delightful.
Yeah. I also love her title of Cat Warlock. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Yes, she is. I do know this character. I do know Ishtala. You know Ishtala.
Tell me a little about Ishtala.
I don't know, a ton about her other than that she's the sassy warlock of the Scions of the Seventh Dawn, who are basically the closest we get. Because obviously, 14 is a single-player game more than any of them, and so you, the chosen hero, go out and do, especially in the first, like in A Realm Reborn, you do most of them on your own. The Scions, I think, start to play more and more of a role as you get deeper and deeper into the story, and so again, I've gotten further than you, but not to where a lot of people agree it really gets deeper and into the best of it. But she's just one of the main group of heroes, your warriors of light, who are out there doing good and saving the world from the big scary monsters and evil empires and all of that stuff. And she's one of the party members and probably one of the most popular ones, just because she like you were saying, she gets to strike that balance that Final Fantasy often does so well between very serious at times, but also funny, whimsical, having the adventure, but then when it's time, you really care deeply about this character, and anything bad happens to her crushes your heart. And so it's like, yeah, perfect.
So she is Ishtla, Knights Blessed. She costs 1 generic, 1 white, 1 blue, and 1 black for a 2/4 legendary creature, Cat Warlock. She's got Vigilance, and at the beginning of each end step, if a player lost 4 or more life this turn, you draw a card. So whether you lost life or they lost life, at the beginning of each end step, at the end of everybody's turn, you get to draw a card.
Ooh, it's a lot of card drawn.
Whenever you cast a non-creature spell with mana value 3 or greater, Ishtla deals 2 damage to each opponent, and you gain 2 life. So she just wants you to cast big spells.
Yeah. I love the artwork on this one, too. The one where that's a little more anime-y is okay, but this primary artwork here is fantastic. She looks like a badass, and she is.
Next we have Cloud again. Cloud, ex-soldier.
Is this guy popular or something?
He is popular. And here's one of the things that I think will happen is there might be characters who get a card in a commander deck and a starter deck, and then in the general set.
Yeah.
So one of the things they did with the Lord of the Rings set that I really liked was certain characters would get multiple versions because there's multiple ways to depict them throughout the story. Like Gandalf gets 4 or 5 cards.
Right. And that makes sense.
Yeah, there is a bit, it's Final Fantasy VII again. On the other hand, it is Final Fantasy VII, and some of these characters can be depicted in multiple ways.
Right, and have been, so it's worth drawing on.
So Cloud ex-soldier costs 2 generic, a red, green, and white for a 4/4 legendary creature, human soldier mercenary. He's got haste, and when Cloud enters, attach up to 1 target equipment you control to it. When Cloud attacks, draw a card for each equipped attacking creature you control. Then, if Cloud has power 7 or greater, create 2 treasure tokens. I love this because I know we kind of rolled our eyes at people who complained about party mechanics not existing in 16.
Sure.
But this is essentially a party mechanic, right? If everybody is equipped up, you get something. And then I like that the power 7 or greater feels like an Omnislash reference to me.
Yeah.
And you get treasure tokens or possibly materia.
Yeah, exactly. It's a stand-in for materia, which I think is really, really cool. I also think it's great that the character art for this one looks much more like an interpretation. It looks like original artwork to me, new artwork, but it's definitely a classic original Final Fantasy VII Cloud pose. And in fact, I think there is a semi-famous Tetsuya Nomura sketch of him striking this exact pose with the sword over his head and the knee kind of out in front of him like he's coming down at the end of Omnislash, maybe even, or maybe right before he delivers it in that final battle. Whereas the artwork for Cloud, hey Lachlan, that we looked at before, is again original artwork, I'm pretty sure, but it looks to me to be directly taken from Advent Children, a particular moment where he's reaching back for the Buster Sword behind him as the airship is flying behind. It's that moment where the team is like maybe going to jump down and join him, and Sid or somebody's like, nah, Cloud's got to do this himself. And then he has a little smile and goes off and fights, I think, Kadaj in that moment. But I think it's, again, great that these are original pieces of art, but taken from those inspirations. That's a really cool thing to do.
Next we have Tidus, Yuna's guardian.
Yeah.
He costs a green, a white, and a blue for a 3/3 legendary creature, human warrior. At the beginning of combat on your turn, you may move a counter from target creature you control onto a second target creature you control. So what that means, Drew, is that there are all kinds of counters. Usually +1/+1 counters or -1/-1 counters, but you can also have a flying counter that will give a creature flying, or a first strike counter, or a death touch counter, or whatever have you.
Sure.
So the other thing that I realized when I was looking at this list the other day is that Shiva, who we talked about earlier, will have lore counters on her. So if you wanted her to stick around longer, you could have Tidus move a lore counter off of Shiva and onto somebody else.
Oh.
And to any creature you want. And most creatures are not sagas, so it won't mean anything, but it will be off Shiva, so the summon could stick around a little longer. And then he has Cheer. Whenever one or more creatures you control with counters on them deal combat damage to a player, you may draw a card and proliferate. Do this only once each turn. And proliferate means look at all your permanents, and whatever counters they have on them, you may put another one of that kind on it. So what this looks like to me is if you think of the counters as being round, it's like the sphere grid. He's helping other characters fill out their sphere grid, which is potentially really cool.
Yeah, really cool.
And Lachlan has some strong opinions about Final Fantasy and Magic the Gathering.
It's true.
Get that boy a podcast, man. Next, we have Terra, Herald of Hope. She costs a red, a white, and a black for a 3/3 legendary creature, human wizard warrior. Now, I puzzled over the black in her casting cost for a while. Now, this is a commander deck, and commander requires that whichever legendary creature you have chosen as your commander, all the cards in your deck have to be of those colors, at least one of those colors. But it can't be any of the colors outside that identity. So on the one hand, giving her 3 colors means more cards can go in her deck if you choose her to be your commander. The red and white makes sense to me. Red for her battle readiness and white for her hopeness. The black, though, feels like it's sort of she has moments of doubt, right? She has moments of being very insular, black can be very selfish, but it doesn't have to be negative or evil or anything like that. It can be very focused on the power of the moment.
Yeah.
And I kind of think that that's what this black is meant to represent, that it's about, in the wrong hands or at the right moment, she is powerful and she's going to do what she's got to do to whatever needs to happen.
Sure. I suppose a representation of the fierce, Mighty Morphin side of her when she morphs into a more bestial form, I suppose. Still, I probably would have gone red, white, and green, but, maybe that's too obvious. Like you said, I think it makes a certain amount of sense, and so, fair enough.
So, like I said, legendary creature, human wizard warrior, and she has trance. At the beginning of combat on your turn, mill 2 cards. Terra gains flying until end of turn. So put 2 cards from the top of your library into your graveyard, and she gains flying. So that's essentially using cards to power her up, right? That's turning into the Esper also. And then, whenever Terra deals combat damage to a player, you may pay 2. When you do, return target creature card with power 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. And I love that because you could interpret that as like necromancy.
Yeah.
But I don't think that's what it is. I think in this case, what it is building a party.
Ah, yes. Yes, right? Indeed.
Because we call it the graveyard, the discard pile. That it's the graveyard in game terms, like in flavor terms. But the graveyard is just as much a resource, and so you can think of it as a second library in a way.
Yeah.
So being able to pull characters out of, maybe the depths of despair.
Yeah.
That sort of thing, I think feels very Terra. It's very we're coming together, we're making the party, and I love that.
Yeah, I think this is also my favorite character art of the whole bunch that we've looked at so far. I really like the art here. It's pretty fantastic. It feels like really, really good fan art, and there's great fan art out there, and I've seen a lot over the years, and this is, of course, I like that the hair is green.
Right.
The other one, the alternate one, it looks a little blonder, which I kind of dig that too. It shows, kind of both. Just this interpretation of her looks fantastic.
And Wizards has done a good job with art direction for the past 30-some years.
Yeah.
It hits and misses in the early days, but this is essentially all official fan art in a way. And they did this for all the other Universes Beyond stuff too. They didn't do screenshots. They didn't take pictures from The Walking Dead and put them on Magic cards. They had artists recreate those characters. So it's super cool. Our last card is Sin, Spira's Punishment.
Cool.
For 4 generic, a black, a green, and a blue, you get a 7/7 legendary creature, Leviathan Avatar.
Yeesh.
Flying. Whenever this enters or attacks, exile a permanent card from your graveyard at random, then create a tapped token that's a copy of that card. If the exiled card is a land card, repeat this process. So, you got to pick a card at random from your graveyard, so something that's died, right?
Right.
And then you bring it back as a token version, or maybe a pseudo-spirit version, like an alternate version, a new created version of itself, which is perfect.
Yes.
Just perfect.
Yes, that is so clever. And the artwork on this one's pretty good too, though I think I prefer the alternate.
And that's it. That's all the cards we've got so far. The set doesn't come out for another 4 months. So this is a pretty early look, but I am just in love. I'm a big fan. I'm going to be buying a lot of these cards. If anyone's like, what do you want for your birthday? Final Fantasy Magic the Gathering cards, please.
Yeah.
Because it comes out like 2 or 3 days before my birthday.
Right? Yeah. Right. Perfect.
So, any parting thoughts, Drew?
It looks really neat. This could be a thing that gets me back into Magic a bit, just because obviously I'm biased for this kind of stuff. I'd like to learn a little bit more about it, but I like the Final Fantasy stuff. I really like the look of the Lord of the Rings ones as well. And so, as much as people might roll their eyes at crossovers and popular IPs and there is a certain amount of it that can work, that can get people who weren't already into your thing to understand why your thing is actually super awesome and rad. And, buying a couple of Final Fantasy Magic the Gathering packs and, teaching my wife to play. She's never played. She doesn't know really. She knows what it is, but she's never played. She's been like, hey, yeah, let's make some decks and figure out the rules and learn how to play. Or maybe you come over on a weekend or whatever, and we all run through it and sit down and do some playing, because now we've got a reference point, and she'll want to play as the Lord of the Rings characters, And I don't think there's anything wrong with letting people have their entry point be something that they already know and love and are familiar with, especially when you appear to be doing it in this way that is very honoring the source material, but also still putting your own kind of fun spin on it and showing why. It's kind of like when we talked to Mo Gallagher about, when you read his books, you get both an understanding of why Final Fantasy is cool and also an understanding of why mythology is cool. And I really like it when things can do that. And so, yeah, being able to be like, this is why Final Fantasy is cool, and this is why Magic the Gathering is cool. When you put them together, they get to create this neat little unique sauce of thing. I'm into it.
Me too.
That's it for this episode. Thank you for listening, and thanks to everyone who has reached out to us. Feel free to let us know what we missed, got wrong, or should have mentioned right here on the Patreon page or out there on the social media. And if this is your first time listening, please consider giving a subscribe to the Patreon page and also to the YouTube channel, so that you're never missing out on our fun conversations about Final Fantasy and other things that it is kind of like. Okay, bye.